Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Future History Project, Isaac Asimov's Future History. And here's a discussion for this week's, Week 8's reading, which was I, Robot to Obey by Mickey Zucker Reichert. I do apologize, first of all, it's a bit late, but I've been busy, and days have sort of blended into the others last few days. But anyway, we'll get to it now. There's not a lot to say, but it sort of continued on the lines of the first volume, I think, of being not overall very good, but had interesting parts. Now, again, we continue. This is the second year of Susan Calvin's training on the job for being a doctor. And this time, rather than in a children's psych ward, she's in an adult ward with people with dementia, and commonly referred to as the garden, because everybody is sort of thought to be basically vegetables. It's run by a doctor who is lazy and stupid, really, and just allows the young doctors that come in just to do whatever they want, as long as he can take whatever credit it is for it, and he can bark out orders when he needs to. And he's the type of person that you think, well, he definitely should not be in charge of something like this. And you go, how could he have gotten away with this for so long and not be, a problem? And then I started thinking, yeah, I can believe that. So, that was sort of, I didn't have to put willing suspension of disbelief into order there. It's I've seen it done, and I've seen it, and I think a lot of people have, incompetent people in high positions, and they retain that job. Yeah. There's other things, an interesting thing, which I didn't notice in the first volume, because when she was in the children's ward, in this one, she talks about a distinct smell that the ward has, and that the hospital has. And that's brought up several times throughout. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because a lot of times you don't have that. And even the one character, like he says, or she says to him, that you smell like the hospital. So his clothing as well smells like the hospital. And every time she walks through the door, she's got that specific smell, sometimes of antiseptics, chemical smell, and whatnot, walking through the door, which I thought was interesting. And then it made me sort of think, well, humans have a smell as well, obviously. Not just from not washing, but just a normal smell on their body, because depending on what they eat and so forth. Now, that's something that they hadn't actually mentioned with regards to the android robots in here as well. But she brought up smell, so that made me started to think. And I don't remember anywhere throughout Asimov's, it might come up later. It could have been something that I missed in the first and second or third readings of the robot novels, and I just wonder if it's going to come up, because it hadn't come up so far, and it was something I don't think I ever thought of before. But it's one of those little things that is kind of interesting. But again, the case histories of the people are interesting. And the writer seems to pick on one thing here, and I use the word pick on in multiple meanings, in a sense, because she has chosen a younger woman, sort of mid or late 20s, who has dementia that's caused by vitamin deficiencies, B12 in specific, to be specific, and her father, that they are vegans, and she is all her life, so she has neurological damage, but can be worse, and she has a run-in with the father, who is overbearing, a bully, a complete a-hole, in other words. So I don't know. Again, it feels like the author is kind of interposing personal things into the story, but not subtly. It's just, there with a sledgehammer. Now there's a few other things that are kind of interesting. Well, it's just if you remember in my first one, I sort of said, well, I thought the big reveal in the first book was going to be that John Calvin, her father, was a robot. Well, it wasn't the reveal at the end of this one. It was about midway through that we find out, yes, he is, or was. So we find out Calvin is not her real surname, and her real surname is Campbell. So you combine that with John. Calvin was his first name, the father's real first name, and was murdered by the Society for Humanity, terrorist society, and anti-technology society. So it was interesting because it was a clear nod to John W. Campbell, sort of, as sort of the grandfather of in a sense. Well, yeah. Well, anyway, it's a nod towards John W. Campbell, which I thought was kind of interesting. Another section here is pretty good because we saw with the story Robbie, that Isaac Asimov rewrote it a little bit, and rewrote it quite a bit, and interposed a lot of stuff into the story in the early 1950s. And one of them was having Susan Calvin as a teenager show up in a museum, and she tells a little story here. She says, she's talking to Nate, the resident robot at the hospital, and it says here, that triggered a memory for Susan's own. She says, I once wrote a paper on a speaking robot. She smiled at the recollection, unimpressive and long buried. It had to be longer than 7 or 8 years ago, because I was still in high school, Physics 1, she recalled. We did a small unit on robotics. As part of the research, I spent 3 hours at the Museum of Science. At the Museum of Science and Industry, observing a so-called talking robot in a children's program. And Nate says, she goes on to say about, this little girl comes and basically destroys a robot. And Nate says, that talking robot wasn't one of USR's, United States Robotics and Human Mechanical Men, but the girl had to be Gloria Weston. And the non-speaking robot she was seeking was Robbie. So we find out what happened to Robbie. And he says here, let me see, that we find out that she found him all right. He says she spent 7 more years with her best friend, in addition to the 2 they shared before they got temporarily separated. Robbie was programmed and built exclusively to serve as companion to a child. The idea was that once other parents saw the incredible bond between robot and girl, the wonderful job Robbie did, robotic nursemaids would become the rage. And then Susan says, except for the Frankenstein complex. And it looks like, yeah, it says many believe innocent. Oh, yeah. And then, like, in 2020, but, you know, there was still opposition for it. And then in this timeline, in 2025, a ordinance came out that robots couldn't be out after sundown. And that sort of says, in a way, says many believe innocent, harmless Robbie and more properly the neighbors' reaction to him were, directly responsible for the ordinance passed in 2025 forbidding any robots in the streets of New York between sunset and sunrise. And he says, as if great bellowing gangs of robots owned the city prior to that time. And he says then shortly after that they were banned on Earth. So it's an interesting little thing, and that sort of fits in. That's all right. The timing doesn't quite work for 2025, but that is the process of things that were happening that, in retrospect, Asimov had sort of created. But also, too, there is a pretty good discussion that she has with Nate before this about the 3 laws of robotics. Now, there has been, and I've read quite a bit of stuff, people have criticized the 3 laws of robotics, saying it's too simplistic. But there's an interesting discussion between Susan and Nate that go into, and putting them in human terms. And that they are much, much more complex than first seen and thought of, because she even says that many thought that it was that they were sort of superficial and they wouldn't be that good, but there are depths to it, and they interweave and work together as a whole. And she even says even more so than its creator. Now she's referring, obviously, the writer is subtly with a hammer, referring to Isaac Asimov, but in this case, she's talking about Lawrence Robertson, who as the character in there as well, who created U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men, and her father, Susan's father. So, because if you take it as an extension, well, when I said grandfather Campbell, like if you take it as an extension, Susan Campbell is Isaac Asimov, and her father is John Campbell, or his father is John Campbell, like in a writing sense, I don't know what we call it, a metaphysical sense. I'm not sure, but anyway, yeah. So there were interesting parts with this. But again, it's just filled with a lot of stuff that the characters that don't really act right or properly, I don't think, with things. She meets a cop, and it's just like the cop is just a cardboard cutout of a real person in every way, or in the 90% of the way. And the relationships too, because after Remington was killed, she starts up a relationship with her friend, a fellow resident, and finds out that it's not going to work, and he's actually gay. It's just the way it sort of comes about is very, very strange, and it's not believable. But anyway, we leave Susan at the end of this book, where she's going to try to go back. She sort of walked out on her training at the one place, but she's going to try to go back to and sort of grovel a little bit and see if she can go back rather than be put behind. So that's where we leave her with this book, and because I'm a bit late, I'm going to forge on with next week's reading as well. So it'll be a double video, this one. And I'll note it in the title for next week's reading. We've got To Preserve, and that's the final volume in the trilogy. This one was written in 2016. I think, is that right? Let me just check here again. 2016, yes. And it's about 40 to 50 pages shorter than the others, and it's like, thank God. So we'll see. I don't, because of the way the second one went, I don't expect a whole lot for this. And somebody else that has read this as well sort of quickly read it over this past weekend and told me, yeah, it doesn't change. So it's not a big surprise to me. But again, like I say, there's some interesting parts in it. It is a long slog for getting those interesting parts, though. That's the one thing. But again, so this will be week 9's reading, which will be iRobot to Preserve, and then we're back to some more Isaac Asimov short stories, as well as a few others before we get into the 6-volume Robots and Aliens, I think it is, a series, but they're very short. So we'll discuss those more next week while I figure out a reading schedule for those. But anyway, I hope there are some that are still slogging along with us, and by the comments, there are a few. There's a few that have seemed to have backed out a little bit. Not backed out, I shouldn't say that, but stopped reading the trilogy here, and then we'll pick up more Asimov stuff later, which is fully understandable, especially for those who haven't read the series before. You're not gonna, I don't think, gonna gain a whole lot by reading these, especially as I say, these are questions that I would love to ask the author or find out. I did a bit of research and searching online, and the author is quite prolific. She's written a lot of fantasy, like a lot of series. Like, to me, from looking at these, they have to be bloated books if they're like 3 times or 4 times the size of this. But I'd like to know how this came about. Like, I know for the fact that the estate asked the author to write them for as a trilogy, but how and why is the timeline changed? Why is this is not Isaac Asimov's universe anymore? This is not the future history. It's like the Strange Relations, the one story with the 2 brothers in a future where family relationship is sort of, there's no such thing anymore. That is not part of the Isaac Asimov future history as set out with Susan Calvin, and then the robot novels, then the Empire, and then Foundation. That is not part of it. And there's a reason for that, because he was writing these stories, a robot story, when he came up with an idea. And the idea is that, they do sort of vaguely fit, because they're robot stories, into a future history. But in retrospect, as he continued on, he started as a shortcut writing stories that fit in that universe. It's a shortcut. You don't need to explain that universe. So in a way, there are going to be stories that build up a canon of things that are future history, even though if it wasn't planned out. For with some rocky and jagged edges that connect them. But then you get ones like I say, the Strange Relations, that is definitely not part of the future history. It doesn't fit in anywhere. Not really, anyway, unless there is, because there's no drastic explanations why that things drastically changed. So that doesn't quite fit in, and that is understandable. But then, because you've already got something that's established, and you're going to bring in or bring back a character that is an established character in that series, as Susan Calvin is, why do you put it outside of the timeline? Why do you change the universe for this? That's my question. And then also too, why make her an MD, like a psychiatric doctor, when clearly Asimov had said that she went to, Columbia for robotics. Now, does she go back to university for robotics, and then starts working for U.S. Robotics and Mechanical Men? Well, yeah, I suppose that's possible, but so it's an interesting thing if that's how it turns out. But so far, there's no hint of that, and it could happen in this volume, or it could happen in a fourth volume if there's something that doesn't happen. So that sort of works out okay. But what I say is that because the author is a doctor, I feel, because of the way the writing is, which isn't very controlled, that she's interposing too many personal things. The writer is imposing on the story. Obviously writers put in personal items, but in this case, in good cases, it should be subtly, and you don't really notice it. It actually works as part of the story. This one is jagged, and not just jagged, it is rough. And it looks like it's just, these things are just sort of, well, I got this idea, so let's shove it in here, let's shove it in there, and so forth. So these are the kind of questions I would love to ask the author, but because it's not kind of something that you can sort of criticize, ask the author, well, I thought your books were crap, but can you explain to me why they're so crap? Well, that's not going to happen, and I don't think they're crap. It's just that I don't think that they're very well thought out, and they diminish from the whole, as a sense, which is too bad, because there was an opportunity here that I think to do something very interesting. But anyway, we'll get back to that a little bit with the end, and we'll talk about all three of them. And I'm going to see if we can get a discussion going a little bit about the three books once we're finished, the end of next week or the week after that. Anyway, take care, BookTube. Let me know what you think. Take care. Bye.